Hey guys, it's Rocky from WheelerChess.com, and I started making this video yesterday actually. I was going to record a live game because I was really close to getting back over 1800 Blitz, and yeah, I just thought I'd flip on the recording. I had just put my daughter to sleep, so I thought I'd escape with a game. Got about a few minutes into the game, and she woke up, so I had to run in another room, and I rocked her back to sleep, and then luckily she went back to sleep pretty quickly, so I ran back out, and I was actually able to finish the game. But it's kind of a shame that I didn't get to show it because we also got a fried liver in this game. So yeah, if I would have won this game, going back over 1800 for the first time in a few months, several months I think actually, if I remember right. But yeah, let's take a look at this game because there's a lot of interesting stuff here to show. So I had the black pieces, obviously. We got a fried liver and go into that Polaria defense that I've shown in several videos so far. And here my opponent played a pretty common move, which is bishop b2. So probably not the best move, but it's certainly better than the weak bishop a4 retreat. And it may or may not be better than the queen f3 line that we've looked at a while ago too. So okay, so this is a pretty common move to play, and here you want to boot this knight. And now this knight can go to either h3 or f3. I believe when the bishop's on d3 that actually the knight h3 retreat is supposed to be pretty good. I'm pretty sure Remigingius Fili recommends that. It's been a long time. I haven't actually seen his whole video on this, but I know that he recommends the bishop d3 line, and I'm pretty sure the knight h3 retreat. Having said that, this position is a little bit different, and I can't explain exactly why yet because I haven't looked enough at the bishop d3 lines. But here, I think knight h3 is a little bit problematic for white. Maybe actually it has similar complications, but I'll kind of share my thoughts as to why I think that's the case based on what I've looked at in the analysis yesterday and today. And of course, if you guys have experience in this line and you want to chime in or correct me or add to this, then please feel free to do so. But the couple issues that I see with knight h3 are, one, that it's hard to get this knight back into the game for a while because this e5 pawn is really annoying, and obviously it can't go over to g5. So that means that white's probably going to have to strike in the center with d4 at some point, which he wants to do anyway. But if he does that a little bit too early, it might open the position before he's really ready with his pieces. So probably I'll have to play d3 first, then d4 after he's got some of his pieces out. Which means it's going to be a while before this knight can get in the game. Now, of course, black's knight on the a5 looks pretty silly, and it's going to take a while for that knight to get back in the game too. So it's not like that's the end of the game or anything. It's just one thing to note. One of the other limitations with this knight is that it blocks the h2 pawn. And for that reason, actually, I think, even though a lot of times I like putting the bishop on c5 in these lines, here I feel like bishop c5 makes a little bit less sense because let's say we put our bishop on c5 and our queen on b6, and we want to look at the f2 square. Well, this knight actually is holding that square. So, you know, I mean, potentially you could snap off this knight whenever you want to and then try to do something, but probably, you know, maybe white will be castled by then. In any case, it's interesting to put the bishop, I think, on d6 here, which it kind of x-rays this h2 square, and because the knight's on h3, it blocks the h-pawn. So white can't play h3, for example. If you put your queen on c7, you have the battery looking up here, then yeah, it could be potentially a problem, and it could slow white down from castling, actually. And that brings me to the third potential limitation, at least what I'm seeing with the knight on h3, is that it makes white a little bit more hesitant to castle, because you probably don't want to take this knight right away and open up the g-file, because if white decides not to castle on the king side, then he could just use the g-file against you. But once white does castle, then, you know, like white castles here, bam. Now this g-file is open, and although both sides can use it, and potentially white maybe could even use it a little bit more because he's got his rook potentially on there, in the short term, black has more activity and has chances probably to get his pieces a little bit more quickly into the attack. So I think it's reasonable to suggest that, reasonable to think that the open g-file is a little bit more dangerous here for white than for black. Technically, black hasn't castled yet, although it's hard to imagine putting black putting his king on the queen side. Although there's some funny lines with that in other positions. But yeah, so those are, I think, a few disadvantages of the knight h3 line, and perhaps it's why I don't think I've ever seen it. I mean, I've always seen knight f3, but I think it was worth mentioning something like that. I guess one other thing to look at might be if the knight's still on h3, for example. Let's just say bishop d6 for the reasons mentioned before. And let's say white really wants to try to do this right away, just to try to get rid of this pawn and give a knight a route back into the game. Here, I mean, black could play queen c7, which I kind of like a little bit better, because I like to try to keep the queens on the board if there's attacking chances, which I think there are. The computer even says that castling is just fine and just allowing the queen trade, which is really funny because, usually, I mean, I would think I would want to avoid this queen trade like the play, because I'm down a pawn, I have this bad queenside structure, and I would like to try to attack. And it's harder to do that without queens, but maybe it's harder to checkmate. But you still can attack white's position in a lot of ways. You're a little bit more poised, so obviously, white could try to get the knight right back into the game immediately. It's be supported by this bishop, so knight f4 would be a sensible move, but also castling's fine. So let's just look at that, just to look at one line potentially in this queenless middle game, I guess we should call it, because it's not quite an endgame. Here, I think black could do a number of things. I originally wanted to put my bishop on e6, but then remember that could run into knight f4, where then you might have to decide if you want to part with one of your bishops or waste a tempi getting your bishop somewhere else. So probably for that reason, bishop f5 makes a little more sense. Bishop f5, at least what I'm looking at too here, looks like it slows down white from putting his bishop on the nice d3 square. Also, you have a nice retreat back here onto h7 for the bishop if you ever need to tuck it away. And you've got your bishops on adjacent diagonals here, which is really nice. So I think for all those reasons, it's a nice square for the bishop. Of course, you could have also tried to put it on b7, or maybe even later on in a6 if white were to put his bishop on f3 to try to attack this pawn. Here, I mean, maybe trying to get the knight back in the game makes sense. Also, maybe trying to develop the other knight out. It's a little bit hard for white to develop this knight immediately, because if he does this, although you probably want to try to keep your bishops, if there's an opportune time to trade this, having the two bishops for some other potentially static advantage or some other benefit, I guess. Like if he were to play knight c3 and you take it, oops, it's not white's move if I did that, and you take it, now you look at these pawns, and although white is up a pawn, it's probably going to be impossible for him to create a passed pawn. So the extra pawn doesn't mean so much. So that means it's hard for white to put his knight on a square that he probably wants to put it on. So he's either going to come through d2, maybe over to f3, which also makes his bishop a little bit awkward, or maybe back over to b3, or he's got to come through maybe a3, which I think is what the computer was suggesting when I was looking at it yesterday. I can't remember. In any case, all this is a little bit awkward and uncomfortable. For black, I mean, obviously he's got to get this knight back in the game somehow. And also this sort of coordination of these two pieces, they're kind of getting in each other's way a little bit, but that's something that would have to be addressed. But also black can look at, for example, if like knight a3, rook a to b8 is interesting because you want to take a look at this pawn, and white can't really ever play b3, or at least until he makes another move to get this rook off the off this diagonal. So probably has to play something like c3 and maybe try to get the knight back in the game this way. This is all possible and everything, but what I'm trying to say is that black still has an initiative, and although maybe he's not playing for checkmate anymore, he can still try to attack these pawns maybe, or maybe try to get the bishop pair, or try to use the tempi that he has to create something here. And I don't think that it's fair to say that that white's winning. If anything, black probably has a small advantage just because of the activity. But let's call it equal and say that this is a fighting position, I think, for both sides, and would be an interesting game to play. So here I don't think black has anything to fear, is what I was trying to say. Okay, so yeah, and then back here, obviously, you don't have to go into that queenless middle game. So you don't have to castle. You can play queen c7, and then if takes, takes, and now it's harder for this knight to get back in the game. So I kind of like this a little bit better. Keep the queens on the board, try to attack a little more. You're hitting this, so it's hard to castle. Also, it's hard to castle because this knight could get snapped off. You're going to castle. You're going to move your bishop, and you're going to put your rooks probably on like the E and D files, or maybe keep one on the B file. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting potential here for black, so probably I would go for this. I think they were fairly equal in terms of the computer analysis. You're talking like a really Small advantage to black according to Stockfish 7, but again, for human players, I think it's just a fighting position where both sides have opportunities. So, okay, so that's probably enough on knight h3, especially considering that it's really never played. But I think it was interesting for me to look at maybe why that was the case. So, okay, knight f3. And here it's kind of almost automatic, but you're going to hit this knight again. And okay, the knight could go back to g1. We've looked at that, and not exactly in this variation, I don't think. Maybe it was similar. I think we looked at it when the bishop was on a4 and the knight going to g1, so the combination of those two things was like doubly horrible. I don't know if I've looked at it in the bishop e2 retreat lines. But anyway, putting the knight back is just, it seems like it's dangerously slow, because as you'll see, obviously black's going to get his bishops out to nice squares. It's going to get castle and get his rooks out. You know, the only piece that's really bad for black is this knight, which is pretty silly, but everything else is going to come to the party pretty quickly. So playing knight g1 seems like it's really playing with fire. So you'll almost always see knight e5. Yeah, so here you can play bishop c5, and I think it makes sense because remember we were looking before with the knight on h3 that it was holding this f2 square, but that's not the case anymore. Yeah, I mean, actually f4 now is an interesting move. c3 is an interesting move just to try to keep the queen out of this dangerous square, because obviously here you would be double attacking both the knight and checkmate, so white does have to do something to prevent that. So either of those moves, either f4 just to bolster up the knight, or c3 would protect against that double attack. And yeah, here's an interesting game. I think probably even putting the queen on c7 is going to be interesting, hitting the knight, just trying to develop your pieces. You might actually, if you force a concession here from white, maybe drop your bishop back to d6 after it's served its purpose on c5. We'll look at a line like that similar in the game. Yeah, so I think here and maybe queen c7 and castles is an interesting setup for black. But I'm not going to look too far in that line now. Probably I'll save that for a game when I actually play it, because in this game I played something else. So okay, here, and I played queen d4, which we'll remember in the bishop a4 retreat lines that this would be a double attack, but of course the bishop's not on a4, so it's not. But it's a pretty transparent threat. Black wants to play bishop c5 on the next move and just threaten checkmate, and obviously here he's hitting the knight. So the other nice thing about the queen on d4 is that white can't play d4 himself to bolster up this knight. He has to use the f-pawn, which is kind of a weakness. Now obviously you don't want to take this en passant, because then it takes with the knight and he's seeing the queen drop back, and probably white's just a lot better there. Okay, so you're going to leave this here, then you play bishop c5, you're threatening mate, so the only move is rook f1. And now you've won a concession here where white can never castle kingside. He's going to have to either manually walk his king over here somehow at some point when there's nothing on the dark squares, or, I mean, it's hard to imagine that he'll ever be able to go queenside. There's just so many moves away. So chances are this king's going to be kind of stuck in the middle, and that's probably one of the things that black's going to try to play for here. I have seen this line before, exactly this line, but I hadn't really looked any further than this, so at this point I was on my own. And yeah, a couple interesting moves happen now here in the game. So my first instinct was to castle here, but I actually held off on it because I was a little bit worried about c3 and then b4. Like I said, a lot of times you end up getting forked in these lines, and like let's just say I castle here and he plays c3, and I've got to put my queen somewhere. I mean, probably d5 makes a lot of sense because you're a safe direction away from the knight where you're not getting attacked by the knight. You're kind of keeping a watchful eye over all this. You're off the dark square, so you can allow your dark square bishop a little bit of flexibility. And here actually you do kind of get forked, and there's some different lines we could look at, but let's just look at this. So it takes, and black has sacrificed a piece here. But he's pretty active. But there's one important difference between this line and the line that I'll show you that could happen in the game. And the difference is that it's white to move here. And with white to move here, he can play the important move g3, which stops the queen infiltration on h2. Not so much that black cares about winning a pawn, but taking the h2 pawn would have allowed the queen to come back to g3 with check on this really weak diagonal. So yeah, in the game, I didn't see quite that far, but I did see that I didn't want to castle right away because of this, so I played bishop d6. And now after c3, which was played in the game, and of course queen pretty much has to go here, and the hitting the knight, we have a little bit of a problem here, because if I'm to move my knight, then oops, bishop c4, which is protected by the knight, and just coming in, crashing through on f7, and black's probably just toast here. So you can't move the knight, so you have to sacrifice a piece. I saw that kind of up to here, I saw this and I realized that it was going to be a sacrifice. So I took this here, and now you have two knights on pre, and you have to decide which one to save. I think it's pretty easy to make this decision. This knight stinks over here. And there's actually a few benefits to letting that knight go as opposed to this knight. So take this pawn. Of course, one of the benefits is that you're grabbing the pawn here. Another benefit is that you're screwing up White's queenside structure, so although he's still up material on the side of the board, it's a little bit harder for him to organize just like a huge pawn roller, which he can do sometimes if all the pawns are nicely connected. And of course, saving this knight makes a lot of sense, because not only is it providing a little bit of shield against this potentially sensitive f7 square, but it could also come out and join the party, whoops, with some potential attacks later. Could come over here maybe to d5, whereas this knight was going to take 2 or 3 moves to get into the game. So lots of reasons, obviously, to keep this knight. I think pretty much everyone would make that decision, but it's nice to think about what all the benefits are, and those are some of the ones that I see. So okay, so yeah, we got this in the game here. And now the difference is that it is black to move, because white is just recaptured here on a5. And that means that black actually can go in and take the h2 pawn. And unfortunately, I did not see that. And I should have seen that if I was going to go in for this variation. So like 4 or 5 moves ago. Like if I'm going to play, basically, if I'm going to play queen d4 all the way back here, then I should know that all this is going to happen, because it's basically, I mean, it's not forced, but the only reason to really put the queen here is probably if you're going to play bishop c5 afterwards. And well, maybe one of the reasons is to try to force this weakness, but you're basically going to play this line. So once this stuff happens, that's forced. Here, like I said, this is better than castling. Yeah, I mean, basically, if you're going in for this, you just have to know that you're taking on h2 here. And now you can see that potentially this check on the g3 square can be a real problem for black, because this king is boxed in like Epilot made style. So it's going to require some sort of concession to block those checks when they come. Okay, so like the rook coming off the back rank, for example, would be potential problem if black could get some other pieces over here. So unfortunately, I played the bad move, castles, and white sees the opportunity here to play g3, and either because he saw that the pawn was hanging, or he's seen the position before, or saw some of the potential complications with the queen checks. So okay, now we're in this position, and unfortunately, I've made a costly mistake, which probably really should cost me the game, to be honest. But practically speaking, white still has some problems to solve, and I have my queen on the dark squares, my bishop's complementing it on the light squares, so that's my next move here. So the drawback of playing g3, obviously, although it was important and probably had to be played, was opening up the light squares. So now I'm bothering this rook, and the rook's got to decide where he wants to go. And now I actually found a couple nice moves. So g5, pushing the rook again. He can't really go laterally, so he's got to pick another square. Pretty much only square that makes sense is f2. Okay, so here in this position, unfortunately, I made another mistake, or actually I think the chess.com computer analysis called it an inaccuracy. I had the right idea, which was to put a rook on the d file, opposing my opponent's queen, but unfortunately I picked the wrong rook. If you want to put your video on pause and try to decide between the rooks and why one is better than the other, go ahead and do that. Okay, so if you also watch John Bartholomew's channel, which I hope most of you do, it's a great channel, John has mentioned in a few of his videos that when you move one rook over to a file, then you're basically saying that the other rook is going to be good on one of the remaining files that it can go to. So here I played rook fd8, wrong rook, and the main reason for that, I think, is that, okay, basically with this move I'm saying that the a rook is going to be either good where it's at on the a file, or on the b file, or on the c file, so the files that it can go to. It could potentially be okay on the b file, especially maybe stopping queen b3 at some point. But if we look at, like, what are my main targets of attack here? The king and the queen. And if that's the case, then I want my rooks on the e and the d files. And because of that, then this rook would have to obviously now waste another move to come over to the e file at some point, thus allowing the the a rook to come over to the d file. So I think that's the main reason. Another kind of side point, I think, is that the f7 square is pretty weak. If white were able to get enough moves to sort of organize maybe bishop c4 and queen b3, and this rook is x-raying the square, I don't think it's too realistic, but maybe it could happen. So it would probably be nice to kind of leave this f rook until I'm sure that I want it on the e file, just in case. But I think that's kind of a minor point because I don't see that attack coming. But it is something that I noticed when I was looking at it. I think the first reason is more important, though. So, okay, so after rook f2 and playing the realm workover, let's take a look at the continuation here. It's not a bad move. It's just not the better move. It's kind of hard to find a good move for white here. He's got a lot of problems. This move c3 that was useful in the opening had a drawback, and one of it is that it's taking a natural square away from the knight, where it would like to just come so that it could be hitting this pawn, maybe helping in the defense of the king here. Also, this d pawn is having a hard time moving, especially now with the rook opposing the queen. So that takes away squares, potential squares for the bishop to go to. Okay, obviously can't go to f4. It also takes away a potential square from the knight. So that means that the pieces have to develop in some sort of slow, awkward way. Where are good squares for his pieces? Like, okay, bishop to a3 looks pretty good. It's hitting f8, and at some point, if you were able to organize something on f7, I wouldn't be able to have my rook on f8. I guess I could always put a rook on the 7th rank, though. But in any case, if he wants to have his bishop on a3, he can't move it there first, because then how's the knight going to get in the game? So first he's actually going to move the knight and then get it out of the way. Maybe knight over here, back into the game, trying to blockade this annoying pawn. Or maybe knight could come over here to d4, then put the bishop on a3. Maybe he can get the rook onto b1, queen b3, and try to organize his pieces that way. Of course, the problem with all that is that it's too slow. White doesn't have enough time for all this stuff. So in the game, my opponent did play knight a3 with that idea of kind of bringing it back in and then potentially doing something else with his pieces. The computer suggested here, it's funny, I let this calculate for a while in Stockfish, and like every time it would sort of say a move was good for white, and then you would let it run for 3 to 5 more seconds, and it would find some attacking move for black. The evaluation was just jumping all over the place. So it'd be like, okay, this is kind of drawish, then, oh, no, it's -1 still because black has a move. But eventually it kind of settled on a couple different moves. Queen b3 at first. That does run into rook b8, and maybe, I guess, queen c4. I can't remember. Probably queen c4. Wouldn't make sense to go to a4 because he could have done that right away. I think that was actually the better move when all was said and done, with the idea of just trying to get his queen off the d file primarily, and then potentially come back over and maybe try to force some sort of trade, although it's hard to see what squares he'll be able to do that on. But yeah, I think the main thing was getting out of that pin. So that would have been better than the game. Knight a3, though, it's logical, and it's a kind of a knight route that a person who plays the bishop e2 retreat in the Fred lever has probably done this before, because these pawns are pretty much always in this position, I think, unless he was able to play for a d4 break. But like in this variation, he's probably had to play this. So yeah, so it's not like it was an illogical idea. But okay, here, of course, my next move should be pretty transparent. I mean, put my rook opposite the queen so that I can push this pawn, and I mean, you pretty much have to play e3 here, I think. If you're not playing it, then it's hard to see another way to really press. Okay, pawn can't take, obviously, because the pin, and pawn can't even push, which is an important point because the rook is hanging. So that means the rook has to move again. And this rook is going on a funny journey from its starting square over to f1, down to f4, back to f2, now to f3, and then wants to probably move again. A lot of activity for the rook in the opening and the early middle game. I guess we're in the thick of the middle game now, though. Okay, well, I can't let this rook take on the next move here, so again, another kind of obvious move. And of course, queen can't take, so bishop takes. And in this position, black does have a win. It is really crazy to calculate everything. I played the correct move in the game, but in no way, shape, or form did I calculate anything even remotely close to what I would have had to do to justify, like to say that, okay, I know that this move is winning. I just made the move based on instinct because I had like a small idea in mind. But if you want to put the video on pause and try to find A, the move for black, and B, why it's the right move. Yeah, get comfortable and get your calculating cap on or whatever, and see what you can come up with. Okay, so I'm going to go over the variations now. So in the game, I played queen c5, which is the correct move. But I had no idea what I was doing, let's be honest. First thing I noticed after I moved, you know how you always see sort of after you move all the stuff that you didn't see before you moved? I was like, oh crap, I hung my knight on f6, first of all. And then my heart sank even further because I realized that after he takes this knight, if I play the check on g1, which I was kind of looking at, right? So I'm double attacking the loose knight and also hitting g1. That was my idea, which is the right idea to start with. But I realized that after that check on g1, the rook could always just come back, or the bishop could block, and he's not really getting checkmated right away. So yeah, I basically thought I had just blundered the game away here. But let's take a look at some of this stuff. So what happens if the rook takes? That's a pretty obvious move to calculate. Of course, not taking the knight here on the side of the board. That's not what the position calls for, because, okay, how's black going to win this position? If black wins, he's either going to checkmate white, or he's going to create an attack so strong that white's got to give up the queen and a rook or something, and then black's just winning all material. So spending 2 vital tempi to come over and take a knight that's not even yet participating in the game it's too costly. Plus, how's the queen going to even get back to a good square now with the rook on this 6th rank cutting off, maybe, for example, the rook coming back to d6? Not to mention that the rook's hitting this pawn, and then after the queen moves, maybe to b3 to threaten a queen trade, then followed up by maybe taking the other pawn with the bishop. Black doesn't have a dark square bishop anymore, so the attack would probably be deadly. After the king maybe tries to come out and slink out through the dark squares, then the light square bishop's coming in. Black's just getting blown away there, losing in probably all sorts of different ways. So after rook takes, then obviously you would have to go for queen g1 check. And okay, white could block a couple ways. Rook blocks is actually slightly better, a little more resilient. And here you would have to, I think you would have to see, probably not like the entire variation, but you would have to at least see that after this check, that it's not really possible for white to survive. If bishop blocks, this is actually worse, because something like this, and let's say bishop blocks here trying to give a root away for the king, you've got a really nice move with rook a to d8. So now we see the power of these rooks on the 2 central files, and the threat is huge threat of checkmate on g1, and the only way to really stop that is to just give up the queen, and then after that still there's checkmating threats, there's checks and forks coming, and all the material is basically lost. So after queen blocks, then you've got check here, and you're winning the queen, and you're also forking things, so you can kind of take whatever material you want there. So that's why it's bad back here to block with the bishop. It's actually more testing to block with the queen immediately. I mean, the queen's going to be lost anyway, probably, so give it up now, and the king might have a chance to survive here. Also, black's down to 2 pieces here, so he's got to be pretty accurate. But not only would you have to see kind of, I think, a fair amount of this if you got this far, you'd also have to see that there's, after this check here, okay, first of all, the king can't go back because that's too much material. So he has to come forward. And you have to actually see this quiet move, queen back to c5, hitting this loose knight. And you have to see that the knight really is hanging and it can't save itself. If it tries, for example, to come back and save itself here, you've got a checkmate in 2 or 3. Queen to d4 is checkmate in 1. Or 2, I guess, after that first move. And if he tries to run this way, you do have to be super careful with black. One wrong move and you can screw it all up. Like here, check would allow the king to run. So not there, but obviously checking here first on b5. You always want to be careful. Like if you're on a king hunt, one of the cardinal rules is to always try to corral the king, keep it in a closed area. A lot of times you can use his own pawns and pieces as sort of barriers where he can't go through. And it's a mistake that I make a lot of times where you kind of play the obvious check, and that can just lose you the game. So here you force the king back, and now you're checkmating this way. And note that the knight can't save itself on c4 either for the same reason. Actually, now the king has no options but to be mated. The queen is covering that retreat diagonal. So that means the knight's actually hanging, and there's not really anything you can do to save it. So king should probably just try to go back and try to hide. You're taking that knight. And here, well, white still has a breath of life, but the problem is that because white doesn't have any pawn cover, really, okay, he's got one pawn here, but it's going to be really hard for him to keep this king safe. He's got to use his pieces to do it. And it's not going to be long before black is able to pin one of these bishops, perhaps with the rook, to the king. And then the queen might try to come and double up on that piece. So probably the bishops are going to be stuck sort of on these two squares. The rook's probably going to be stuck trying to protect the pinned bishop. In the meantime, either the rook or the queen's going to start mopping up some pawns. And when that happens, the pawns are going to march, and something's going to queen. A piece is going to have to be given up to exchange for that. And it's a slower death, but it's death nonetheless. So this would be the most resilient probably of all those lines there. That's rook blocks. And, well, okay, bishop blocks is pretty similar. You're going to get similar kinds of variations here with taking the queen or bishop blocks. They're both bad. So for all those reasons, taking on f6 is actually not the right move. So that means you would have had to have seen a good amount of that, and you'd also have to have seen that the better move here is actually knight c4. Not just because it saves the knight that was on pre. I mean, it was on the edge of the board anyway. The point is that it's going to provide a little more piece cover. So after we get a similar variation, here actually bishop blocks a little bit better, but we'll look at both. Takes, rook check. Now white can block. I guess he could block with either minor piece. It's slightly better to block with the bishop because if the king ever is able to move, then the bishop is temporarily hitting this queen, and of course the rook is also hitting this queen. So, but in any case, rook takes, knight takes, check here, and now I mean it's pretty tough. For example, if queen blocks, check, and if queen tries to block this way, then you can take the rook, and after queen c3 check, whoops, not queen blocks, but if the king tries to run, then you've got a nice continuation here, where first you play the rook over to e8, hitting the queen, and where's the queen going to go? I mean, probably it can only go to d1, so it's off the file and also trying to participate in the defense here. Note that after this check here, which is deadly because you've got two pieces converging on e2, the king can't go forward because he wants to checkmate like this. So he's got to go backwards. And then you've got a really nice move. How you doing? You see all this stuff so far? If you saw this far, oh man, I need you to give me some lessons. Unstoppable mate threat here on the second rank, so the queen has to give herself up. And we're not done yet because you just lost your knight. But you had to see here that even though two rooks are often better than a queen, in this position the queen is better than the rooks. One, because in the starting position of this end game, the queen versus the rooks, both the rooks are on the same color as the king, so there's a lot of potential forking opportunities. Also, the king doesn't have very much cover, so that increases forking opportunities. And finally, black has a dangerous pass pawn, the c pawn. So for all those reasons, the queen is better here. For example, just like queen e3 check, and if the rook doesn't come back to f2 to block, then probably we're going to get some forks. So rook blocks here, and now the c pawn starts to roll. And it looks like maybe white's going to be able to save himself with some kind of perpetuals on the f file with the doubled rooks. But you're still running your pawn. Remember, this rook is pinned for the moment, so he's got to unpin. And, well, here you can just keep pushing if you want. You can even allow f7 to be taken. Because he's never going to get the perpetual, because, for example, here you've got some checks, and this is the problem with the lack of king cover here, because you've got another check here, check on d5, and now if black continues to try to resist with the king, then he's losing this way, and the c pawn runs after the king can't stop it. So that means after this check that the rook actually has to come back to f3, and now you can win this way. You know, winning the rook here, or you could just push and win this way. There's probably a few other ways to win. So you would have had to have seen all that, and also that the queen is better than the rooks here. So needless to say, I didn't get this far. How about all that? That's pretty cool, huh? Okay, so that was bishop blocks. So let's take a look at rook blocks. Takes here, and the variations just slightly different, but kind of similar ideas. Takes here, and okay, a resource that white does have here is blocks, but you can play this check on g1 and then win the queen this way. And if he tries to block with the queen, then you always have this common c3 check that we saw, and after the king runs, you take the rook. And again, there really isn't. There's not enough chances here for white to create some sort of attack on the loose pieces that black has. So, in addition to those variations, you would have had to kind of realize that you weren't losing material back. Also, actually, the queen still has this knight covered. So, a lot of crazy variations there. Oh, here, actually, in this position, I forgot that black even has a better move here, knight d5, which is just totally crushing. This takes advantage of the fact that the rook's not on f1 in this variation, so I forgot about it. So obviously the rook was hitting the queen in that other variation. And, well, here there's nothing to do except resign. I mean, you could try something like queen e2, but just takes, and he has to give up the queen, or if he tries to resist a little bit and run the king, he can play this check. It's kind of a funny variation, and even rook d3. Now he's got to give this up here. And yeah, here there's nothing to be done. I mean, if he tries to run this way, then you get checkmated this way, and like that. So he's got to block with the bishop here, and obviously he's getting checkmated in pretty similar fashion here. So back here, instead of trying to resist his fate, he should just take this rook immediately. And now the king is running, and here the king gets a little bit further, but of course it's not going to matter much. The king can run all the way over here, but eventually he's getting corralled into the corner, and he can try to resist as much as he wants, but eventually checks come in here, and then obviously staying off the light squares here, but mating on the dark square. So yeah, there's really nothing to be done there. And if back here, instead of queen e2, the king tries to run, then you can just take this. Whoops, actually taking with the rook is better. After takes here, which he shouldn't even do, then king here, and you're going to get a similar kind of checkmate over here with the rook. Well, actually here, king, queen would have to block, and the knight and the queen will finish the job. So a nice couple more variations there. But that shows that also that even the best move here, the knight c4, is failing in all variations. So given all that, it looks like white doesn't really have much of a move. He actually tried something else in the game. So after all this here, he didn't play knight c4, he didn't play rook takes, he actually tried hitting my queen, but he forgot that I'm taking his queen first with check. So after takes here, then not playing the check, but taking the knight, which also tactically defends this knight, because in the game he played this, but then you're checking here and forking, and that's just too much material now. Plus the attack continues, so my opponent resigned. And yeah, this was a crazy game. I think the few final points about it are, like if we take a look at the computer evaluation, I ran this on chess.com earlier, white played almost perfect chess, like for 24 moves, because his blunder didn't come until the end here. His blunder was actually was this bishop e3 move, which was clearly a blunder. But prior to that, he had played 22 moves here of not perfect chess, but 21 excellent moves, nothing even subpar, a few minor inaccuracies, and that was enough to lose the game, even though I had a couple of inaccuracies. Even though I went into a line where I was sacrificing a piece, first sacrificing the pawn, then sacrificing a piece, then going to this sort of crazy variation, and my average center-pawn loss is great. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this game played out, and I'm pretty curious. I mean, at first I was thinking maybe I'm not going to play this queen d4 line, but I'm kind of curious to play it again, actually. Now that I've gone through this and analyzed it, I like this idea. I would go in for this piece sacrifice again. I think it's really interesting. So what I would just have to remember to do, obviously, is after here is to play this queen takes, and I'd have to look a little bit more, explore a little bit more how I might continue my attack here, and what some of the best tries are for white. But I like this idea. Then after maybe I try that a couple times, then probably I will. Whoops, go back here. Probably I'll have to explore more bishop c5, because it seems like probably it is the more sane try. So we'll see if I get some games in these lines in the future. I haven't seen bishop e2 quite as much recently, but maybe because opponents at a certain level are starting to run into some of these vicious attacks. I mean, if white can play almost perfect chess for all those and make a couple small inaccuracies and get totally just crushed, then yeah, then then it's tough to play for white. Let's just put it that way. And yeah, the last cool thing about this is that because I won this game, I got back over 1800, which for my blitz rating, which I hadn't done in a while. And yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. It's cut off a little bit here, but it says 1803. And yeah, I'm at the, let's see if we can put that back on there. Yeah, I'm in the top 2.3% of blitz players on tits.com and in the top 50,000. Pretty cool. I got into the top 1% early back in October. So I want to try to make it a goal for this year. I wonder if I can get over 1900. I think I really have to put a lot of study time in because I'm losing too many end games. I'm not really planning very well in the middle game, and I've got to work a ton on my tactics. So basically everything. Of course, opening theory too. So I just have to improve in everything. So my new idea is to try to be a more all-around player and put a lot of study time in. So yeah, I will hopefully share some of the stuff I come across with you guys as the site continues to develop. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I'll see you around for the next one.